How close to your thoughts are you? How close do you feel to the thoughts as they come in? A lot of people might feel like this is a bit of a silly question. All my thoughts are in my brain, so they're like inside of me. So I don't know, pretty darn close. But think about it a little bit more because the truth is that we're not at the same distance from all of our thoughts that we think we are. Consider the thought, man, these socks are a bit uncomfortable. Or consider the thought, my fingers are a bit cold. Now consider the thought, I'm so angry at that person who almost ran me off the road. Or consider the jealousy that you feel when you see certain people engaging in things you wish you could. We don't feel all of these thoughts to the same intensity. We don't feel all of them in the same places. Thoughts can set in from a lot of different places. Some people feel certain thoughts arise from deep within them. Some thoughts feel like they approach from behind us. Thoughts are really amorphous, and the way that they come in, the way that they leave, it's not always the most clear to us or the most predictable. So it might seem a little bit silly to ask, how close are you to your thoughts? But it's an important question. In psychology, this is one of those things where a tiny distinction can make a pretty significant difference. And that's the difference between thought distancing and dissociation. Because they are pretty similar. In a sense, they are distance from your thoughts. But let's talk a little bit about why they're not the same and why one can be really damaging while the other is pretty essential to mental health. Let's get into it. So let's define the two terms. Thought distancing is the ability to step back from your experience. Remember, we are not the experience itself, we are the observers of the experience. The self, this concept that we have of who we are, what makes us us, and where our sort of free will is directed, does not have to take ownership over every thought we have. I've made a video about this before, but you are not your thoughts. Your thoughts are sprung upon you a lot of times. Now, some you will direct and some will feel like yours, but being able to determine which ones don't feel like your thoughts is pretty vital. So thought distancing is the skill in the ability to sort of take a step back in your experience and observe your thoughts rather than feel deeply bound to them. And this is essential. This is an essential mental health skill. This is one of those things where it sort of comes out of the Eastern tradition of philosophy and meditation, where the longer that they sat and meditated, they observed that these thoughts can sort of come from anywhere and you can actually just let them go and not have to take ownership over them. So thought distancing, the ability to take a step back and not feel such tight proximity to your thoughts and feel like they are so powerful and overwhelming and on top of you, it's very essential to learn this skill. So meditation is a great way to learn this. Just sit for a little while, sit for a long while, a half hour to an hour, and observe what happens. Observe your thoughts as they come in. Observe your thoughts as they leave. Observe which ones stick around a little bit more. Maybe you can track back why it sticks around. Is it important to you in some way, or did it really pull on something that was emotional? But get some distance. Be able to step back and say, I may have had that thought that says you're so angry, but I don't have to be. That was just a thought. And yeah, it caused a cascade of physiological reactions, and maybe my heart rate is going right now. But that anger is ultimately something I can work back down and take greater control of. And actually, ironically, getting some distance can allow us to, on the back end, reassert some more control over ourselves. But that shouldn't be the main focus. The main focus really is to just observe your thoughts from a distance so that they don't feel so powerful over you. Things like panic attacks, things like psychosis, these are experiences where the thoughts dictate reality. Thoughts feel so real and so visceral and so true that they actually warp our perception of the reality around us. And that's ultimately the risk when we become too proximal to our thoughts. When we hug them too tight and take them too seriously, it can lead to really bad long-term mental health effects. Unfortunately, thought distancing, while it's very healthy and adaptive and pretty essential to building a sort of meditative and self-awareness practice, it's quite similar to an actual psychiatric symptom called dissociation. Now, dissociation has two types: derealization and depersonalization. I've experienced both of these, and so I can tell you that derealization, it's more like you've walked into Barbie land. It's just the world doesn't feel real, it doesn't feel tangible, you don't connect really emotionally or truthfully or rationally with anything around you. So it's like walking through a sort of glistening bubble world where nothing really has a sort of tangibility to it, at least in our psyche. That can be pretty dangerous. That's very dangerous if it becomes something that's happening continually. The other one, depersonalization, that really feels like stepping back in your experience and essentially going third person mode. Like you don't relate to who you are. Even the sense of I sort of feels fuzzy. And you can't really make these connections between the things you're experiencing and the sense of self, this identity, and that's dangerous too. So, depersonalization, derealization, both of them carry a lot of risk. The unfortunate, or maybe the paradoxical thing of this, is that it is also a distance from your thoughts or a distance from your experience, but not in a good way. And this is why I talk about a lot of these psychological concepts. They can just be confusing because thought distancing is good, dissociation's bad, but you're telling me both of them are distance from our thoughts? Make it make sense, Jonathan. Well, I'm going to try. So, thought distancing is a healthy way to take a step back in your experience when you're in a calm state of mind, when you're not under intense amounts of duress, and you can sort of process and pick through your experience, pull apart your thoughts, really make sense of them, reorient your perspective. It can be very beneficial. It's really the core of self awareness. Observing first, having the awareness first, then we can turn that into change and really make a lot of use out of it. But how is that different from dissociation? Well, intention is the biggest difference. So, thought distancing is something you're doing intentionally. It's a self awareness practice that will bring you towards a greater sense of awareness and peace and insight. It is a growth activity. It's something you're choosing to do out of your own volition, out of your own free will, and you're setting aside the time to do it. That's the difference from thought distancing from dissociation, because dissociation is ultimately not something that you've chosen in that moment. The confusing thing is that chose is kind of like a nebulous term because in a way you do choose dissociation, but not in a sense of like you're sitting down and you're like, I'm going to dissociate today. I mean, actually, some people can't make that happen if they're very familiar with dissociation. And so, I mean, maybe in some ways they can choose it, but generally it's not chosen. It's something that's sort of forced from the outside due to these trends that you engage in, the sort of covert psychological behavior of deep avoidance and basically running away from negative emotion. So when there is a negative emotion or there's a sort of negative experience on the sense of identity, when you get in that mentality of reflexively avoiding that, we can't handle the discomfort of a negative hit on our identity, or we can't handle the discomfort of negative emotions, a negative interaction, then eventually we get into the point where we're basically just running away from our experience, not stepping back from our experience, which would be thought distancing, where you're actually taking a moment and kind of trying to see it from a bird's eye view. But dissociation, it's more like you're running away. This can be induced by substances. So dissociation is very common. It's actually a core part of certain substances like ketamine, that dissociation is actually inherent to the process. So it's not that dissociation is inherently bad. When it's in a controlled setting and it's done through a sort of exogenous introduction of some sort of substance, there is research that it can be beneficial because it tears down the sense of identity. When you're choosing to do so, when you're doing so with a clinician nearby, when you're doing so with very clear intentions that you're going to break it down so you can rebuild it in a healthier way, that dissociation can be beneficial because it's time bound, it's controlled, and it's intentional. For most people, that's not the case with dissociation. It usually feels like an experience that's forced on the individual. It doesn't feel in their control. And it's deeply disorienting. It's deeply distressing. It's a frustrating and really confusing experience. And I've talked before about how confusion is damaging. Dissociation really is one of the highest levels of confusion. That's why in my confusion video, I've talked about the sort of mental effects that can come from deepened senses and feelings of confusion that can lead to identity confusion, experience reality confusion. That's what dissociation is. It's very harmful, can be very harmful, and it really is a sign to you that you're running from some things that you really shouldn't be. And I know that sounds a little bit harsh because those things you're running from are probably some severe traumas or really frustrating tough interactions with people. But ultimately, we can't run from things. We do have to face them. And we can face them with some distance. That's the beauty of thought distancing. But we shouldn't run away from our experience. We should just take a step back to observe it. So that's sort of how I tease them apart. One seems intentional and chosen, and one seems sort of unconsciously forced upon them. So with these two concepts, thought distancing and dissociation, they feel very similar, but they're not. And one can be very adaptive, one can be very maladaptive. I hope I made the difference between them a little bit clearer today, but I'll leave you with one final phrase that might help you remember the difference between the two, and maybe help you notice when you're slipping into one rather than attempting to do the other. Here it is. Thought distancing is observance. Dissociation is avoidance. I'm going to say that again. Thought distancing is observance. Dissociation is avoidance. That is the big difference. One is intentional, one is meant to put the mirror on yourself, to put a spotlight on yourself, to really get some awareness of your thoughts, where they're coming from, what they mean, what to do with them. And the other is a sort of avoidance of the pain that we feel inside, the distress, the intolerances, some of these things we just struggle to face. Now, we do need to face them. Find a professional, find a very good friend, do the work if you need to. I still think knowing the difference between these two can be very beneficial, even if you've not experienced either of them. But it's a good practice to be able to learn that thought distance, to spend some time meditating and kind of teasing apart, what's happening? What is your experience? How can you change your experience? How can you be less judgmental of your experience? How can you embrace the things that happen to you just as much as you embrace the things that you do? So that's what I wanted to talk about today, how we can tell the difference between thought distancing and dissociation, and how we can maybe use one rather than the other, or if we're noticing one, how we can pull back and try a different way. If you have any questions about this topic, I know it can be a little confusing, leave them in the comments and maybe I can expand on it a little bit more or answer your questions directly. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys next week.